Picture this. Over 7,000 years ago, deep in what we now call the Sahara Desert, an ancient artist crouches beneath a rock overhang. He isn't sketching myths. He's capturing the world around him. Giraffes grazing, lions prowling, and hippos wallowing in clear flowing water. And at night, instead of silence, the darkness comes alive with the distant roar of lions and the hum of insects, a thriving, pulsing wilderness lost to time. But that's not the Sahara we know today. Instead, what we see is a barren and destitute landscape, hundreds upon hundreds of miles of nothing. Yet the DNA of two women who lived more than 7,000 years ago does prove that perhaps the Sahara was green. Beginning about 14,600 to 14,500 years ago, during the end of the Pleistocene era and leading into the early Holocene period, it is said that Africa was far wetter than it is today. At least, that's what's found in the Cave of Swimmers, where Holocene artists depict bodies of water and mammals that graze the area, with humans making it their home. Rivers and lakes such as Lake Chad were rapidly growing to about 75 times the size it is today, largely thanks to glaciers on Mount Kilimanjaro expanding and the Sahara slowly flooded with new life, allowing it to blossom. It is believed that more and more people migrated to the Sahara, setting up their straw huts and living the lives of hunter-gatherers. They left such things as the Defuna canoe, one of the oldest boats ever to be discovered, with hundreds of paintings all along the Cave of Swimmers and in the Caucasus Mountains. Paintings of a thriving community with sights you'd hardly ever get to see in the Sahara today. Left behind by a thriving culture that now extinct who fled from their homes. The Kiffian culture isn't just a random tribe of people who lived in Africa. They are the last to have experienced the Sahara in its full glory, with rivers flowing and lush green vegetation providing all the tools they needed for survival. Preceded by the Caspian culture, they were skilled hunter-gatherers who made the Sahara their home, living near large water bodies and leaving behind cave drawings that depict their lives. Since this was before the time of livestock, they largely traveled the Sahara, moving from one spot rich in resources to the next, using wooden canoes to traverse the vast distances. Canoes dating back thousands of years have been linked to them, with stone tools and wooden fishing hooks providing them the means to survive in the Saharan wilderness. Then it was all taken away. No more fish to eat or animals to hunt, and water simply dried up. The Kiffian simply vanished, becoming a forgotten tribe, until a daring German explorer, a Hungarian aristocrat, and an unlikely Egyptian courier would finally bring their memories back to life. Since the dawn of modern humans, questions have always been asked about why the Sahara is such a destitute landscape and how those who did live there survived. Yet searching the desert itself proved futile, just miles upon miles of endless dunes. But with constant dust storms blowing west, perhaps the ocean might reveal some clues. So when geologists first began looking at the evolution of the Sahara, they turned to the Atlantic, more specifically, the coast of Mauritania. It all started in the mid-1800s when a German explorer, Heinrich Barth, crossed the Sahara and discovered these paintings and engravings. Puzzled, he couldn't exactly figure out why the Sahara he saw and the images on the walls of the caves didn't really match up. This was further reinforced in 1923, when an Egyptian courier, Ahmed Hassanein, further explored the Libyan desert, finding even more depictions of savanna animals near Gebel el Uwainet, which didn't make sense given the dry conditions he experienced. This led both men to question whether the Sahara might have actually been green just a few thousand years earlier. But the real search began in the 1930s, when Hungarian aristocrat and desert explorer Laszlo Almasi braved the excruciating heat, lived among the Saharan people, and finally coined the term Green Sahara, sparking many geologists, paleoclimatologists, and archaeologists to dig even deeper, to find out exactly why the Sahara has changed so drastically over the last few millennia. His astonishing journey through the sandy dunes of the Sahara didn't just breathe new life into what could have been. It led scientists to dig for evidence in the most unlikely of places, beneath the Atlantic Ocean. What they did was focus on the sediment deposited off the coast of Mauritania, clearly revealing the wet and dry times the region had undergone. The geologists began by taking samples of sediment in the Sahara, where they'd find an exact match in the Atlantic Ocean. They could clearly see how much sediment was deposited in the area during each period, concluding that the more sediment deposited, the drier it was. However, when the sand turned to mud, less dust was transported by wind, leading to less dust found in the sediment. It showed that the Sahara was wetter, but to prove this fact, they found samples of pollen in the sediment, which showed that during certain times, more pollen was present in the dust deposits. Moreover, the pollen could be traced back to various plant species, like grasses and sedges, commonly found in more humid regions, with a decrease in desert plants such as ephedra during the wet period. But the real nail in the coffin came when mummified human remains of two women were found near a rock shelter called Takakori in remote southwestern Libya. This led scientists to conclude that at some point, possibly the African Humid Period from about 15,000 years ago up to 5,000 years ago, the Sahara was far greener than it is today. But if the Sahara was green, it needed the most important ingredient for life on Earth: water. The scientific explanation to this wondrous moment begins with planet Earth, more specifically, the orbital mechanics. It all started on a planetary scale with movement that reshaped the world to what it is today. For the science geeks watching, it is simply the Earth shifting, or rather tilting its orbit, increasing solar energy to the northern hemisphere by 4 to 8%, almost like tilting a farmer, moving his irrigation from the south to the north. This, in turn, resulted in stronger winds moving toward it, bringing with it lots of rain due to drawing more moisture. The phenomenon called the African monsoon, which still happens each summer and winter, would be able to move further north, deeper into the Sahara. Rain began falling over the desert, and with it came new life, with plants and other species quickly growing thanks to all the new water. Essentially, the desert turned from sand into mud, creating the perfect landscape for vegetation. But here's where it gets even more interesting and a little technical. The more rain fell, the more vegetation grew, and with it, more moisture was kept in the plants. This in turn reduced the proportion of solar radiation, or heat, reflected off the sand back into the atmosphere. Almost like a mirror that once reflected heat back into the atmosphere, but would now be covered with vegetation, preventing the heat from escaping. But as wild as these claims are, you know we need some evidence. As the humidity grew in the Sahara, it brought with it even more rain, eventually leading to actual bodies of water forming. This was further explained by recent research, which proved the Sahara had actual bodies of water and wetlands which formed in natural basins. Researchers found that at one point, a lake known as Lake Megachad was covering a large part of the Sahara, about 150,000 square miles at its peak, being about 590 feet deep. To put this into perspective, that's bigger than all the Great Lakes combined. More rock art discovered near the region proved exactly where the shorelines were, with markings only being visible above the water level. It included markings of animals commonly found in the savanna, which were later confirmed with fossils being found in these basins. But it wasn't just the few depictions on cave walls and animal remains that proved the Sahara was once a thriving savanna. In fact, the whole area had its own river system, with scientists specifically finding river deposits in countries such as Libya and Algeria. Along these rivers, some of the first evidence of human occupation also became clear, as fishhooks and remnants of what would be considered canoes were found. This meant that at some point, humans needed these tools to survive, which doesn't make sense to have today. With more water now pouring into the Sahara, waterways such as the Nile and Niger rivers significantly increased their runoff, which essentially allowed the Atlantic and Mediterranean to be connected through northern Africa at some point. Better yet, this aided the migration of both humans and animals, with this ancient civilization taking full advantage of these waterways to move along the Sahara. Archaeologists continued their search, finding evidence of fireplaces, more tools, and mounds of fish bones that could never have been found in the area had some water not passed through at a point. All of this evidence led to the conclusion that human populations peaked in the Sahara about 9,000 to 5,000 years ago, before it slowly tapered off. But I'll get to that in a second. What is even more fascinating is the fact that these languages in Eastern Africa, particularly in Mali and Ethiopia, are completely different from one another. Yet words like hippo and even certain rhythmic patterns commonly used in dances to communicate with ancestors proved that perhaps at some point families, friends, and even memories got lost in the chaos, starting afresh and giving us new cultures whose history and memories are intertwined. This meant that at some point these civilizations had to have lived close to one another, specifically somewhere where hippos were a common thing. But that is where things once again changed, and the Sahara went from a sprawling metropolis of lush green vegetation to the barren landscape we see today. Who is to blame? Or was it just the Earth once again evolving to give us the world as we know it? While monsoon weather was not uncommon in the early Sahara, it wasn't always wet. Evidence shows various instances of droughts befalling the area during this time. It meant that people would naturally migrate more toward reliable water sources, and with rivers slowly drying up, fewer and fewer ways of moving along these vast spaces were possible. Using the same dust records to determine the monsoon period, scientists could find that about 5,500 years ago, the Sahara once again began drying up. This is largely attributed to another shift in the Earth's orbit, resulting in the cooling of the northern hemisphere and pushing monsoon conditions back south to where they are today. The research indicates that the northern sites were the first to lose population as more and more people began migrating to the south, while all this took just a couple of centuries and the Sahara was again a dry desert. Yet the question now remains whether or not this could happen again. To put this into perspective, the African Humid Period was not the first of its kind to hit the Sahara. It is the latest of 230 episodes that befell the Sahara in the last 8 million years, happening each time when an orbital shift of the planet happens. This means that as the Earth continues, it is very likely that something like this will once again happen in the future. No one knows exactly when or how this might happen, but as the world evolves and the Earth proves its resilience, another green period might be waiting for those in the Sahara. It took millennia for the people in the Sahara to have a reliable water source, building small societies that lived off the land. But the natural orbital shift of the Earth would erase it in just a few centuries. Today, only remnants remain. Cave drawings telling their stories of a world we never knew existed. Next, uncover how one ancient culture, perhaps even older than the Kiffian, The Marsh People faced a tyrant that nearly erased them from the face of the earth. Click to find out.